वीडियो और आपका आज वीडियो में
स्वागत
और आज
है।
वीडियो हम लेकर आए हैं उसका टाइटल है
इंडिया अंदर मोदी अभिजीत चावड़ा स्पेशल दी रणवीर शो 243।
तो चलिए देख लेते हैं वीडियो, लेकिन इससे पहले
इस वीडियो के चैनल का विजन लिंक आपको हमारी वीडियो की डिस्क्रिप्शन में मिल जाएगा। सब्सक्राइब करें, लाइक करें, शेयर को फॉलो करेंगे चैनल को। उसके लगभग लोग चैनल का लिंक इंस्टाग्राम पे लिंक भी हमारी वीडियो की डिस्क्रिप्शन में मिल जाएगा। सब्सक्राइब करें, लाइक करें, शेयर को फॉलो
तो
करें।
चलिए देख लेते हैं ये वीडियो।
Democracy wasn't born in Greece. Democracy was born in India. We had our own form of democracy, which would have elected kings or queens, and they could be deposed if they did not perform. Right? So we don't need to be lectured about democracy. We don't need anyone to teach us what democracy is. The truth is that Indians are all one. Muslims are our brothers and sisters. Christians are our brothers and sisters. I believe that even the Pakistanis and the Afghans and the Bangladeshis, etc., Sri Lankans, they are all the same people as us. We have been divided artificially. The West is great at divide and rule, and they seek to continue doing that.
I'm not going to make this intro too long because all of you know what Abhijit Chavda brings to TRS. This one's a geopolitical special from an India perspective. Spoke about the Modi government for the first time. Spoke about the geopolitical aspect of India in 2022. Globally speaking, we're heading into some very intense times and audiences have gotten to know the basics of geopolitics. What about some deeper layers? That's what was discussed today. AC returns on TRS. Make sure you follow TRS on Spotify. We're a Spotify exclusive, which means that every episode's available on Spotify 48 hours before it's available anywhere else in the world. This is one more epic geopolitical special, and it's coming straight at you. Enjoy.
आई होप मेरी आवाज में ऊंची गई होता है ना।
All right, another super pacey, super intense TRS episode with the ultimate TRS All-Star, Abhijit Chavda. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much. Great to be back on the show.
Sir, we've done lots of geopolitical specials. We're doing another run of geopolitical recordings today, beginning with India. We've never really broken down the Modi government, India's role in the geopolitical sphere of the world. That's what we'll do today. And this one's meant for Indian citizens, but it's also meant for citizens of other countries, which I strongly believe have a skewed perspective of India because of media narratives given to them. So we'll be taking into consideration all these false social media narratives, everything from the prosecution of minorities to the criticism of the current government to the good things that the current government is doing on an international level. I'm super excited about this episode. I'm fumbling. Are you excited, sir?
Very much.
Nice. We were just having a conversation outside about how you said you've gotten way busier in the last 6 months to a year. And that's because of the kind of reach that YouTube kind of provides to anyone who's providing content to YouTube. You also said that you're not getting enough time to read as much as you'd like. But knowing you, I feel like geopolitics is your subject. So that's something you're constantly in touch with.
Yes.
So right to say this?
It is, yes.
Okay. What's exciting you or scaring you about the geopolitical scenario in the world right now?
What's really interesting is that the world is changing very rapidly. Typically, you see change at the geopolitical scale decade upon decade. In the 2020s, we are witnessing change year upon year. That's how rapidly the world is changing. There is a multipolar world kind of right now. There is this tussle between the US and China. Certain nations seek a multipolar world. The US seeks a bipolar world. China seeks eventually a unipolar world. So that there are three different worldviews that various nations have, and it's a tussle between these three worldviews: unipolarity, bipolarity, and multipolarity. So who's going to come out on top? We'll know within a couple of decades at most. So that's what's interesting right now. Really interesting.
I feel it's been a few months since we did our last recording from a geopolitics perspective. Do you still feel we're on course for some sort of an international scale world war?
I hope not, but it is a significant possibility for sure.
Okay.
Because there are multiple friction points worldwide. We just saw what happened in Taiwan. We already know what's happening in Ukraine. There's a slow war happening, the classic slow war strategy that Russia is employing. There is tension between India and the US right now, significant friction, tensions and a tussle that's going on. There is obviously the India-China border dispute. The Chinese are constantly prodding and poking India, and India is not giving in. So there's plenty of all these issues, there's also the China-Japan issue. The Chinese are continuing their so-called peaceful rise, which is not very peaceful. It's the rise of a bully. And then there's the old guard, the US, the Western world, the Western bloc, which is now in visible decline because there's a whole host of problems there.
Why visible?
Visible decline because we are seeing the economy stagnating. We are seeing massive inflation. We are seeing a crisis of leadership in the West. The only leadership was from the US. The other states are essentially satellite states, essentially of the US. And the US clearly has a crisis of leadership right now. There are all these issues in the West. The Chinese think it's their time to rise, but their economy is also stagnating. India's economy is rising very rapidly. Let's see how long that continues. I hope it does. So there are all these very interesting scenarios going on at various different parts of the globe. What's clear is that this is people have been saying it's the Asian century. Some people were saying it's the Chinese century. It could possibly be the Indian century, actually, the way things are going right now. So it's very interesting times we live in. And there could be military conflict. There are multiple flashpoints. There's always the India-Pakistan flashpoint. The India-China flashpoint is there. The entire border is undemarcated. We've had issues in the past. We've had clashes in the past. The Chinese obviously seek to constantly keep India on the back foot, destabilize India. There's a Taiwan issue. The Chinese want to get that island back. It is their stated objective. They want to do it as soon as possible. They are waiting for the right opportunity and so many other issues. So yes, there are plenty of flashpoints, and any of those could spark off a war, like what happened in World War I. One little thing happens, and the entire continent is in turmoil.
So we've kind of let the pot simmer till the tension has reached the brim, and now we're just waiting for something to happen to spark off probably a worldwide conflict.
I think we don't want to see a worldwide conflict, but it's a possibility. Because see, once a spark is set off, you never know what's going to happen. Once you start a conflict, it can escalate to any level. Now, the trick for India is to not get involved in any conflict for the next 10, 20 years.
Why?
Because our economy is growing really rapidly now. The past 2 years, because of the global issue, the pandemic, we had a downturn in the economy. The first quarter of 2022, India's economy grew at 13.6%, which is phenomenal. Now, that is something that may not be sustainable in the long run. But even if India's economy grows at 8% per year, by 27, we're going to be at $5 trillion, the GDP. By 2032 or 2033, we're going to be at $10 trillion. Once India reaches the $10 trillion mark, it's going to be unstoppable. Because as your economy grows, your hard power also grows correspondingly.
Which is your military...
The military strength.
Force.
Correct.
Okay.
The military strength. Because if you have more money to invest in the military, you're going to get stronger. So as your GDP grows, your military also grows. Once India reaches the $10 trillion mark, nobody will essentially be willing to contemplate messing with India. So the trick for India is to reach that figure, the $10 trillion mark figure, without getting embroiled in any significant military conflict anywhere. It's going to be a tightrope walk, but let's see how that goes. I mean, there are other nations that do not want India to reach that stage. There are nations that do not want to see India reach even the $5 trillion mark. The Americans don't want that because they've already made a big mistake with China. They aided and abetted the rise of China back in the 1970s, 80s, 90s onwards, and now see what they created. They created a big monster which is now threatening their entire status as a superpower. They do not want to repeat that mistake with India. So they seek to use India as a counterweight to China, but they do not seek to see India rise too much. So they help India in certain ways, but they seek to destabilize and hamper India in other ways, and that's what we are witnessing right now. So that's the tightrope walk that India has to walk. India has plenty of enemies, plenty of adversaries in the subcontinent, in Asia, in the Western world. India essentially has no allies. India is going it alone, but India is capable of going it alone. So that is the tightrope walk that India has to do for the next 10, 15, maximum 20 years, and then we are out free.
So many tangents to go on. If anyone's tuning into one of these AC podcasts for the first time, I highly recommend you go check out all our past episodes that we've done in Hindi and English as well. This might be our 15th episode or so. And it's also a great entry point if you're just getting to learn about geopolitics for the first time in your life. Speaking about geopolitics from a very human level, a lot of my intro to geopolitics was through these podcasts. One thing I've realized is that the rules of geopolitics also apply to human situations, like when you're at a party, when you're in social situations, when you're in your office. Same rules apply about allies, about alliances, etc. The second thing I've learned is the factors that really contribute to geopolitical growth. So when we're talking about geopolitical growth, it's primarily, in reality, it's primarily about hard power, which is your military strength, and it's about your control on the oceans. Is there any third factor that you would put in this bracket?
It's about access to resources, raw materials, minerals, from iron ore.
From your own land?
From anywhere.
From anywhere.
Yes, and for that you need supply chains, you need logistics. So it's about controlling the supply chains, the sea routes, the land routes. You need access to energy, you want access to oil, you want access to bauxite, to coal, you want access to the rare earths that go into semiconductors and various other things. You need access to all the raw materials. You need to have a massive industrial base that can convert those raw materials into finished products. You need a massive military that can safeguard your access to all the shipping lanes and all the infrastructure and logistics that you built up. All this, it's all about control. The more geography you control, the more powerful you are and the more secure you are. And to do that, you need Navy, Air Force and Army and all that.
Is it fair to say that geopolitical power is your ability to go into a war and win it?
One of the factors is that as well, yes.
Okay.
Because in case one of your supply routes is it comes under anyone's control or somebody threatens it, you need to be able to go and intervene and safeguard it. So you need to have the ability to project military power wherever your interests lie. So that is also a significant factor in geopolitics.
The third massive factor from a geopolitical perspective that I've understood is very simple. The richer you are, the more powerful you are.
Absolutely.
And actually, while we talk about power is just a means to get to the money. And when we're talking about USA's growth or China's growth, it's always been from a place of making money, building large-scale businesses, ideally in the world of manufacturing, being able to be self-sufficient, and then using all that money you've made to strengthen your army, to strengthen probably your mining capabilities, your trade capabilities. So actually, it's a race for the money.
It's a race for the money. Essentially it boils down to that. It's a race for money and for control. Power is control. Power is not influence, it's control.
Okay.
Yeah. We call ourselves influencers. People call us influencers. So it means that when we speak, people will listen to us. But we do not control those people. They do not obey us. Right? So power is about how much you control. If you control 10 people, they obey you instantaneously and without question. You have that much control. If there's 1,000 people, well-armed people who will obey you without question instantaneously, you are way more powerful. If you have 1.4 billion people who will obey you instantaneously, you are massively powerful. And it's all about control of people and control of resources and territory. So that's what power is. People believe that influence is power. Influence is not power. Influence is just that people will be willing to listen to you, but they may or may not take you seriously. Maybe you are funny, maybe you're entertaining, maybe you are witty, charming, whatever, but that is not power. Power is absolute control.
We get a lot of international viewers when it comes to AC podcasts. And keeping that in mind, I want to talk about Narendra Modi and the BJP. I thought we'll do this at the end of the episode. There's a lot of narratives that go out in the West about India being sort of a very skewed nation, that we're on the verge of dictatorship, that we're on the verge of self-destruction. I have a bunch of friends who are deeply inspired by left-wing ideologies. I have lots of friends who are deeply inspired by right-wing ideologies. I'd love to know your kind of relay of information to the West in terms of if you had to introduce Narendra Modi from both a national standpoint and a geopolitical standpoint, what changes have you observed in the country? You're also someone who doesn't follow national politics, just like myself. But we do follow what the government is up to, especially from an international perspective. The truth of the matter is that you could debate a lot about what this Indian government could do better on a national level. No one at all can argue that there is a better international representative of India than this government, because this government knows how to show its teeth and they know how to make money. I'm saying these things because we just spoke about geopolitical power. Power is about money, power is about control. There are theories that say that maybe democracy isn't even the way to go. Maybe it's not the right way to run a nation. What do you have to say about this whole dictatorship angle? The fascism accusations? What do you have to say about Modi on an international level? And what do you have to say about this projection when we're talking about 2032, 2033 as an important phase? I think every single Indian, no matter what their political ideologies are, they know that this government is going to stay in power for 10 years. Because what brings a government into national power in India are the votes of rural India. And I've often seen that most left-wing ideologies are only in urban centers in India. You go out in the interiors, you'll barely find anyone who's like out and out left-wing. At least the majority will vote for the current government. And they have a very different outlook on the current government. My point is, I've traveled all over India and I'm very, very sure that this government is going to stay in power until that 2032-33 mark at least, if not beyond. So Abhijit Chavda, sir, how would you like to introduce this government or talk about this government to international audiences?
So this current government came to power in 2014 and India had just gone through a decade of stagnation. The previous regime, the Congress regime, came to power in 2004 when Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee and his NDA coalition lost the election. And then there was a period of high growth because of the policies that the NDA had implemented, because typically in national economics, you see results a few years after you implement policies. So the first 5 years of the UPA rule was good. I mean, the nation did well. And then the economy took a downturn. It went into the doldrums and there were all these scams and God knows what. So the nation was sick and tired of that. That's the mood that one sensed. And then Mr. Modi was projected as he was put as the next prime ministerial candidate. And he had a very strong track record of turning around the state of Gujarat from one of the backwaters of India into the most rapidly developing state in the country, essentially. And people voted for him. It was a popular vote. And he came to power with a big majority, or a decisive majority. He did not need the help of coalition partners to form the government, right? And clearly his policies were good in the first term, and that's why he was re-elected with an even bigger majority in the second term. So the policies that he has implemented have been very nation-centric, national interest oriented, and the foreign policy as well. So he has focused on the economy, he has focused on the military. It's taken time to get things going because it's a massive nation, 1.3 billion people, huge inertia. You want to implement policies, it's going to take several years for the results to start becoming visible.
How many years realistically?
At least 5 years.
Okay.
At least 5 years. You implement a new policy, you put a new policy forth, you order the bureaucrats to start implementing it. They're going to take their own time. India's bureaucracy is a legacy of the colonial era. It's not the most agile bureaucracy in the world, and so on. So there are all these issues, and now we are seeing the results of that. You also had the coronavirus down, the entire recession because of that. 2 years we lost 2 years, but now the economy is doing well. So overall, if you look at Mr. Modi, he is an extremely popular leader. India is a vibrant democracy. People make these accusations of fascism against the BJP and Mr. Modi. When you talk about fascism, you're talking about Mussolini, you're talking about people like Hitler, right? They put people in concentration camps. They massacred lots of people. How many people have been massacred in India or put in concentration camps? Zero. Right? So that accusation is just to tarnish the image and paint somebody with a certain kind of brush. Mr. Modi is clearly an extremely popular leader. And when you talk about democracy, people say that India is teetering on the brink of dictatorship. India is the most vibrant democracy in the world. Let's compare India with the United States. The United States is a two-party nation. It's a two-party state. It is just one step ahead of communist China, which is a one-party state. It's just one step ahead of North Korea, which is a one-party state. The US only has two political parties. Who's going to represent the Native Americans? Who's going to represent the Hispanics? Who's going to represent the African Americans? Who's going to represent the various minorities that are marginalized in the US? In India, we have political parties that represent every single faction of society. In the US, everything is force-fitted into this two-party framework. It is artificial. I do not consider this to be democracy. If you want to consider any nation undemocratic or dictatorial, it's actually the US, not India. India is a very vibrant democracy. Yes, it's chaotic. Yes, there are issues, but it's a far better democracy. It's far better representative of the people and their aspirations, especially all the small minorities, than anything the Americans can show us. So these accusations of India teetering on the brink of dictatorship, they are risible, laughable, ridiculous, right? So that's the thing. Now, which system is good? Is dictatorship good? Is democracy good? Well, I would say that any system is good as long as it produces results, right? As long as it serves the people and serves the nation in the long term, any system is good. For the longest time in the world, we had monarchies, we had emperors, queens, kings, emperors, and they did a good job. It's only in the past 70, 80, 100 years that we have been experimenting with democracy, and we still have to see how far that experiment succeeds. India is the birthplace of democracy. We had the Mahajanapadas, these self-governing people's republics that go back to the Mahabharata era, which is several thousand years before today. Democracy wasn't born in Greece. Democracy was born in India. We had our own form of democracy, which would have elected kings or queens, and they could be deposed if they did not perform, right? So we don't need to be lectured about democracy. We don't need anyone to teach us what democracy is. Now, is democracy the right thing for India? I think we are a democratic nation. It's in our DNA, right? But maybe this form of democracy may not be the ideal form of democracy. Maybe in the future we will tweak things and embrace a different form of democracy, but it will still be democracy. Now, in the 21st centuries, the nations that will rule the world are the nations that will implement policies and adjust to the changing environment rapidly. The ones that react the fastest and implement policies the fastest in the shortest time, these are the nations that will rule the world.
Can you give an example of the situation? Like what kind of policy will have to be implemented because of something happening on an international scale?
Right. Let's say there's a global recession and your economy is suffering because of that. Now, let's say you have to change policies. Maybe you need to change the way your banking system works, or maybe you need to change the way the interest rates are, or any economic change. If you take several months to implement a certain change, it may be too late to save your economy. But if you can do it immediately with one order, and it's done tomorrow, that's gonna turn the ship around very fast.
Is Modi the most powerful prime minister our country has seen?
Possibly.
In history?
Maybe not the most powerful, because today's geopolitical scenario is that there is a lot of interference within India from external sources. What happened in the early 1990s, the 1992, I think the economic liberalization, it came with a whole bunch of caveats. So India had nearly gone bankrupt. We had less than a week's foreign reserves left, maybe 3 or 4 days foreign exchange reserve left. So we had to take loans from the IMF and the World Bank. Now, when you take loans from the IMF and the World Bank, they're gonna take a piece of your soul for that in exchange. Yeah, you give more than your pound of flesh. So they will tell you, they will give the money, but they will tell you exactly how to use it. You cannot use it for whatever you think is right. They will tell you how to use it. First of all, you have to open up your economy. You have to allow their companies to start investing in your economy, and all kinds of things happen. And that's how your country gets penetrated by the various tendrils and roots that come from the West, from the deep state, essentially, and so on.
Which is America.
So
when you're taking a loan from the IMF, the World Bank, you're actually taking a loan from Big Daddy USA.
That's what it is. And that's when India slowly became compromised from within. There are various political parties that do enjoy patronage from other countries. They used to enjoy patronage from the USSR. The USSR dissolved, they broke up in the early 90s. Then they were looking for a new big daddy. I'm not naming anybody, but it would have happened. So then they found this new big daddy in the US, and the US is well known for spreading democracy across the world in a variety of ways. Sometimes they bomb democracy into a country with bombs. Sometimes they infiltrate democracy into your country in a variety of means. And what they mean by democracy is you do what they tell you to do. And you run your country the way they think is right, depending on their whims and fancies. So India at that time became compromised, and since it has been more and more compromised. So right now, there is a huge amount of external interference within India, subnational diplomacy and whatnot.
What does that mean?
It means that the Americans will engage with politicians in India, not at the central level, but at state level, and even smaller than that. And that is essentially, trying to compromise your country and try to create factions within the nation and all that.
Like it's a modern version of divide and rule.
It's divide and rule. It's the 21st century of divide and rule. That's what it is. So they've learned from the UK. The US empire is the Anglo-Saxon empire. The capital shifted from London to Washington DC, but it's the same entity essentially, right? So that's what they're doing. So Mr. Modi has to contend with these issues. India is compromised. India has lots of, General Bipin Rawat spoke about a 2.5 front war, that if India has to go to war with China, Pakistan will also get involved, and there's going to be one more front within India. So one is China, one is Pakistan, and half is within India.
Wow.
Yeah, so 2.5 front war. So that's what he meant by the internal problems within India, which have been created by outside forces. And there's a whole bunch of issues within that. So that's why Mr. Modi has to contend with those things. When it came to somebody like Mrs. Indira Gandhi, she did not have that much of problems within India. So she was able to be more decisive. She was able to bifurcate Pakistan and free Bangladesh, for instance. Yeah. So she was able to pursue a more muscular foreign policy. I'm not saying Mr. Modi is not pursuing a muscular foreign policy, but Mr. Modi is playing the long game. He's playing the game, I think, that Deng Xiaoping had advocated: hide and bide. Hide your capabilities and bide your time and work hard and strengthen yourself. So maybe that is the right thing for India to do right now.
And get richer.
Get richer. That's the whole deal. Get richer. So that's what India is doing right now.
Okay. Let's talk about the current government a little bit more. When we say Modi, do we really mean Modi? Or do you think we have our own version of, I don't want to call it a deep state, but there has to be a sort of think tank. They say Ajit Doval's a part of it. Legendary figure from probably India's modern history. People haven't heard about him. Amit Shah is obviously there. It's the BJP top leadership. I'd love to know from you, because we are assuming that BJP is probably going to be in power for the next 10 years. Who will be like the next PM of the country according to you? Without getting into national politics, and I'd also kind of reframe that question as, who would you like to see as the next PM from an international perspective? The three candidates, maybe four, that keep coming up in discussions around politics are Nitin Gadkari, Yogi Ji, and maybe outside of the BJP, there's Rahul Gandhi and Arvind Kejriwal. Do you have any opinion on these four gents?
If you want to talk about the next Prime Minister, see, Mr. Modi has this unofficial rule that once you reach the age of 75, you've got to step back from any leadership position and take an advisory position, right? So Mr. Modi is, I don't know, 72 years old maybe. So he's got another 3 years of active political life that he can choose to continue. But it looks like he may step down at the age of, once he reaches the age of 75. So that may be after the 2024 election, assuming that he wins that election. So then the question is, who's the next PM, like you asked. So what sort of PM would we like to see? We would like to see somebody who is relatively younger, right? If you are younger, you have more energy. So the gentleman that you mentioned, Mr. Kejriwal, I'm not sure what his age is. Mr. Gandhi is obviously youth icon. Then we have Mr. Yogi Ji, and Mr. Gadkari, Mr. Amit Shah. I think it's either Mr. Amit Shah or Mr. Yogi, in case Mr. Modi wins the next election and then he decides to step down at the age of 75. It could be a toss-up between Mr. Amit Shah and Mr. Yogi. So Mr. Yogi has now already got considerable experience of administering and governing a massive state like Uttar Pradesh, whose population is comparable to the population of the US. Yeah. So it could be Mr. Yogi, or it could be Mr. Amit Shah, because he has a lot of experience in these administrative and governance matters. He also is the Home Minister of India. He understands the problems, and obviously he would understand geopolitics as well, because if you're dealing with home, you're also dealing with external issues that are tangentially connected to home. So I would say it could be a toss-up between Mr. Amit Shah and Mr. Yogi, and I would expect that Mr. Modi will take the call as to who is to be the next Prime Minister. When it comes to external politicians like Mr. Kejriwal and Mr. Gandhi, Well, I don't have much of an opinion about them, apart from not considering them to be very strong leaders, because they, I haven't seen that sort of leadership potential in the two of them. I'm sure Mr. Kejriwal is doing a fantastic job governing Delhi. I'm sure it's all visible. Mr. Rahul Gandhi has never been a chief minister or any such thing, so we don't know what his capabilities are like. I'm sure he is very capable, but he has never demonstrated that thus far. So that's why I cannot really pass judgment on Mr. Gandhi.
Wow, this podcast began as a geopolitics update, but I think we're going to rebrand this as an India and geopolitics kind of podcast. The criticism that the government gets on a national as well as an international level is its treatment of minorities. And there are certain narratives being given to the West. As Joe Rogan says, most of Western media is very left-wing minded. So they will kind of project the narrative that they want their people to see. In terms of, for the longest time, people thought India was a country full of snake charmers and, kind of that Aladdin kind of world, mud houses, etc. And a huge part of India is rural. But we don't have snake charmers. We actually have smartphones and YouTube and TRS in like these rural places as well. So the West has a very morphed image of India since years. I believe, and this comes from my perspective of having a lot of friends who live abroad, most Indians that live abroad get a very skewed perspective of India. They think we're living in a land where Muslims, Christians, Sikhs are prosecuted. When you live here, I mean, and you and me are Hindu males, so we probably don't have a right to comment on what these people go through. For example, in some ways, maybe you and me are the white males of India. So I need to mention that here as well. When I do speak to my Muslim friends, my Christian friends, they do feel a sense of a lack of ease. My question when I hear what they have to say is, have you seen The Social Dilemma?
I haven't.
Social Dilemma is a documentary on Netflix which talks about how algorithms can really skew your perspective of reality. Social media algorithms. So if the algorithm gets to know that you belong to this minority, you belong to this group of people, maybe you would lean towards the left. Maybe. So let me show you more left-wing videos, posts that will shift you even further down the left. And the easiest way to manipulate human minds is emotion, especially the emotion of fear. That's my question. And again, I'm asking you this from a learning perspective. Like, do you have a perspective on this? In terms of what's your response to all the brown people living abroad, Indians, Pakistanis, Sri Lankans, about what this religious reality of India is? In saying that our economy is booming, it's growing at a crazy pace, we've historically always been prone to divide and rule mentalities. And our enemies will always try bringing in those divide and rule mentalities. If we actually give in to it and start giving fuel to this Hindu-Muslim rivalry fire, it's going to probably harm the economy in the long term. We all know it. The country needs to come together and work towards a stronger economy, in my opinion. Which is why podcasts like this, which do affect thought, which do affect national narratives, are important. Because the news will tell you one side of the story. But let's talk about the 360-degree perspective, sir.
Let's do that. So let's talk about our minorities. Let's look at India's track record with minorities. When the Arabic conquest of Persia happened, the Persians were within 2 or 3 decades almost completely converted to the religion of the Arabs. Some Persians, our brethren and sistren, decided that they sought to preserve their culture, their religion, Zoroastrianism. Where did they go to safeguard their religion?
India.
They came to India. They escaped by ships because the Arabs did not have a good navy or any navy at all. So these people from Persia, they came out of Persia, they escaped from Persia, and they immigrated to India. They did not go to Africa, they did not go to any other nation in the Mediterranean, in Europe, wherever. They came to India. Why was that? Because they knew they would be welcomed in India. And they were indeed welcomed in India. They were given land to settle down in Western India, in Gujarat. They were allowed to keep practicing their religion freely. There was no compulsion upon them. There was no tax upon them for practicing a foreign religion or any such thing. The only thing was that they were told to assimilate into Indian society and adopt the local language. Only the language, nothing else. And the Zoroastrians, the Parsis, they are among the best performing and most prosperous minorities in India. They have never ever been persecuted even once in the past 1,300 or 400 years that they've lived in India. Let's talk about Jews. Jews also came to India nearly 2,000 years ago. Even today we have Jewish communities in India. India is the only nation that has never ever been anti-Semitic. There has never been a single instance of persecution of Jews in India. They have lived in India as a small minority for almost 2,000 years. And they are still practicing the religion. Many of them chose to go to immigrate to Israel and do Aliyah, etc. But they have had excellent living standards in India. They have always been respected and cherished, and nobody has ever made an attempt to force them to change their lifestyle or anything. Talk about Tibet. When the Chinese invaded and occupied Tibet, where did the Tibetans go? They came to India. India always had an open door policy for the Tibetans. They were allowed, they were welcomed into India, and the only place where Tibetan culture still exists is India. Northern India, Dharamshala and various other pockets of Tibetan settlement in India. So India has always welcomed minorities. India has always been generous, magnanimous, and India has always cherished its minorities. When it comes to Muslims, are there any concentration camps? When we talk about the Chinese, I think the whole world knows what the Chinese are doing to their Muslims. In Xinjiang, there are concentration camps. Maybe more than 1 million Muslims are being interned there. They are being re-educated. They are being forced to eat pork and God knows what. Does India ever do that? There are tensions from time to time. These are left over from history because of the past 1,000 years. It's been a terrible history. But there is no systematic oppression or persecution of Muslims, none whatsoever. And there are narratives that are being spun to make it look like Muslims are being oppressed. I think Muslims have far more rights in India than in Pakistan. Ahmadiyas are not considered to be non-Muslims in India. The Pakistanis do that. They consider Ahmadiyas to be non-Muslims.
What are Ahmadiyas?
It's a certain sect. Even I'm not sure what exactly their belief system is, but the Pakistanis consider them to be non-Muslims. There was this very famous Pakistani physicist, what's his name? Abdul Salam. He was an Ahmadiyya, I believe. It's one of those sects, yeah. And he won the Nobel Prize, but the Pakistanis did not celebrate that. Right? No such thing is there in India. Whether you're Shia, whether you're Sunni, whether you're Ahmadiyya, whether you're Ismaili, whether you're Khoja, whether you're whatever else, everybody is accepted. There is no discrimination whatsoever. When it comes to Christians, what sort of living standards or status do Christians have in the Gulf? How are they treated in Iran? How are they treated in Pakistan? Vis-a-vis how are they treated in India? India is the best place for minorities. Minorities have actually more rights in India than the majority. If the Hindus are the majority, Hindus have less rights than minorities. Minorities get special treatment. They get more privileges than Hindus. Minorities, whether it is Christians, whether it is Muslims, they have the right to administer their places of worship, and the government doesn't interfere there. But the government doesn't allow Hindus the right to administer their places of worship. So minorities have first-class status in India. Most Hindus essentially have second-class status in the nation. I think everyone knows this. So this narrative that is being spun, that Muslims are being oppressed in India or Christians are facing problems, these are lies. There is no such thing. I know Christians and Muslims. I'm sure you know Christian and Muslim. They may have certain perceptions, but have they personally ever faced any problems? I don't think so. Right?
Yeah, I just think, and this is coming from being a content creator for 7 years, fear is one of those emotions that spreads very fast in the world of media. And if big media houses want to grow their numbers, they'll often use fear-mongering as a way to achieve their results.
Yes.
Even that small narrative of a minority being oppressed in India will be blown out of proportion by media houses.
Indeed.
In saying that, while we're talking about this sort of right-wing extremism narrative that's probably fed to minorities on social media, I'm sure there is a vice versa version of that, which means that maybe if you're a deeply right-wing minded person, you're fed certain narratives on social media to instill even more hate towards minorities. And I've seen people like that even on the show, who have these like really skewed beliefs about how minorities are terrible for India. I think the truth here will be found when you take a step back and understand the times we live in, which are so heavily dictated by social media algorithms and WhatsApp.
Indeed.
Which is dictated by Big Daddy USA again.
Yes. So they have ways of essentially creating a certain mood in a certain demographic.
Or maybe two moods and pushing them far away from each other.
Polarized moods, yeah. Opposing moods, opposing narratives. So when this guy Edward Snowden defected from the US, and I think he sought refuge in Russia, yes?
Russia.
He disclosed the existence of something called PRISM. So PRISM was this top secret, hyper secret program that collates data points from all across social media, from all your cell phone signals, from everything, from all the signals in the world. And it can give you an overall map of what's going on in each nation. Mm-hmm. And they had some... and one of the countries of particular interest for the US was India. So even in 2010, 11, 12, somewhere around that, they had a significant amount of interest in India. And today you have all these social media signals. Social media has really taken off since then. So it's very easy to trend certain hashtags and completely color and change the mood of a nation or a certain community within the nation at a moment's notice. The truth is that Indians are all one. We are all one people. We are the same DNA, we are the same blood. Muslims are our brothers and sisters. Christians are our brothers and sisters. I believe that even the Pakistanis and the Afghans and the Bangladeshis, etc., Sri Lankans, they are all the same people as us. We have been divided artificially. The West is great at divide and rule, and they seek to continue doing that in order to play their geopolitical games. We have to understand this, and we need to all realize that we are the same people, no matter what religion we practice. And we need to work together to take the nation forward in the right direction. No?
The actual game here is money.
Yeah.
And monetary growth is why probably the enemies of India as a country are trying to stop India's economic growth. The easiest way to stop it is create internal conflict.
Indeed.
By kind of manipulating social media algorithms, etc., etc. India cannot have as glorious a history as it's had in the last 75 years if it wasn't for APJ Abdul Kalam. If it wasn't for, just generally all of India's minorities working with India's so-called majority, which is Hindus. We have to come together for economic growth. It's been the lesson that we should have learned from history. Because divide and rule is a mentality used by external powers to completely divide us. In saying that, I just hope that this one little bit of this podcast helps kind of give out an emotion of brotherhood, of sisterhood, of safety to India's minorities. I don't know if it will, but I sincerely hope that it does. Because if by chance, even hypothetically, if there was ever a concentration camp kind of angle, an actual fascism kind of angle, you have a huge section of the majority which would actually revolt just out of humanism.
Indeed.
Or humanitarianism, whatever it's called. Because at the end of the day, I personally feel Indians in general are some of the most empathetic, nicest people in the world. I'm not talking about Hindus, Muslims, Christians, just
overall.
Indians in general.
Yes.
And there has been brotherhood. There has been good energy in this country. If you see it from a historical perspective, people will stand up and revolt. People won't accept that level of prosecution at all. And most of all, we have a lot more to lose because of that from a geopolitical perspective than, say, some extremist has to gain. We need to make the money over the next 10, 20, 30 years, and we're only going to make the money when that 11-player team has Muslims, Christians, Sikhs, Hindus, everyone working together. Money is the name of the game, sir. Keeping that in mind, we'll move on to like the next part of this podcast. How do we make the money? Like, according to you, is it just manufacturing? Is it export? Is it agriculture? What is the economics of this actual game to become richer? When you spoke about 2032-33 as the tipping point, I'm assuming that so much wealth gets created that it's the same logic as you becoming rich in life. Your wealth will compound for you after a point. Is it the same logic on like a macroeconomic scale? Because I've not studied economics, so I'd actually like to know your perspectives on it.
So what needs to happen is that everybody needs to start producing something and contributing to nation building. Nation building is the name of the game. The more you build the nation, the more prosperous the nation becomes. We need to build railways. We need to build highways. We need to build infrastructure. We need to build more buildings. We have such crumbling, dilapidated infrastructure. We need to recreate that. We need to invest in all of that, and that will create more employment. That will create more need for cement, more need for coal, more need for steel, more need for all these things, for all the raw materials that go into creating infrastructure. And of course, manufacturing is also a major component of that, because we can export goods that other nations need, and we can get money in return. So it's a all around 360 degrees development perspective. When the Sendai earthquake happened in 2011 in Japan, that was a disaster for the country, but it was also an opportunity to rebuild the nation. And that can spurt off the economy. I'm not sure if they did it properly and if it revived the economy or not. I don't think it happened, but something like that is actually a great opportunity to revive the economy, because there's a huge demand for rebuilding that creates a big demand for raw materials. It creates a big demand for new jobs. People get busy. There's a whole lot of economic activity. And India is a country that needs a whole lot of that at a massive scale, right? So we need to, all of our cities are essentially crumbling. Right? All our highways, I mean, lots of new highways are being built right now. I think about 30 or 40 kilometers per day are being built right now. So that is the right direction that we are going in, but a whole lot more needs to be done. We have one of the biggest railway networks in the country. We can transform all of that into high-speed railways, and we can double, triple, quadruple, quintuple the railway coverage of India, because we need that. And we need to build many more airports. We need to connect all the smaller 2-tier, 2nd-tier, 3rd-tier cities with each other through air. And there's so much more we can do.
What actually happens through connectivity?
Connectivity means you have more access to the nation, to other parts of the nation. There is people-to-people contacts, and you can go and do more business. Right? If you can do business, you can go and do a job in another part of the country, and so on.
Again, so, the keyword is collaboration.
Collaboration. See, Japan was destroyed in 1945. 2 atomic tests were done on the population of Japan. Japan was in ruins at the end of World War II. How did they rebuild the nation so fast? High-speed rail. It connected the nation, and that's how all the all the business was sparked off, because Japan became a massive economic and technological power. It was all because of connectivity, because people were able to get from one place to another very rapidly, and that connected the nation again, and that's what sparked off the major growth of Japan's economy. So interconnectivity is the key. If a nation is disconnected, you don't even have unity, and you cannot transact business with various parts of the nation. Let's say you have coal in one state, and you have a demand for coal or steel or whatever far off. You need to be able to transport that rapidly. You need goods trains, you need people-to-people contacts and all that. So all of this really spurs of the economy. So that's what India needs to build. And of course, manufacturing is also a key, because China used that to become an economic major power. India can replicate that.
Does it apply to this decade as well?
It does. Okay. It needs to happen right now. I think it is happening, and it's picking up pace right now.
What actually makes manufacturing in China that cheap? It's basically that from a business perspective, that people from other countries say, okay, if I want to manufacture something, let me manufacture it in China. It's cheaper. One is definitely the size of their population, which has now started to dwindle a little bit. The population is aging, it's dying off, which means India will be the most populous country in the world. Does that give us the ability to bring the cheapest form of manufacturing for other countries? And if yes, is that the actual way to go? And which is supplemented by the connectivity stuff you spoke about.
Right. Manufacturing is indeed the way to go. The Chinese population is now aging because they had this one-child policy. India did not have that. So Mr. Modi speaks about India's demographic dividend, which is pretty much true. We have a very young population, a very energetic population. It's a growing population even now. So that can be utilized in order to fuel India's economic growth. So manufacturing is something that takes time to mature. The Chinese started the manufacturing process in the late 1970s, early 1980s. Initially, Chinese products were very bad. they had a very bad reputation. But by the 2000s and 2010s, they had achieved the level of maturity where they did not need any more Western technology. They had already absorbed all the Western technology, and then they were able to iteratively improve upon that. And today, Chinese manufacturing is at a high level. They manufacture almost anything that you want them to manufacture. You say, I want this, they'll say, yeah, I will do it. So India will take a little bit of time to reach there, but we need to start. I'm sure we have started now. Made in India, Make in India started in the first term of the Modi government, and now I think it's kind of slowly taking off. We have semiconductor manufacturing plants that are coming up in various places, and a whole lot of other stuff is happening. We have this major transshipment port that's coming up in the Great Nicobar Island, and lots of stuff is happening. That's not manufacturing, that's trade. But all of the pieces are now being put in place, and we could be on the verge of a big takeoff.
This is why governments need to be in power for the long term.
Yes,
to see long term economic and geopolitical change. Kind of a rookie question here. Do you feel there's a game of intellect in making yourself a richer country? And the second supplemental question is, I mean, this country is a country full of intellectuals. That's our global repute as well. Like, you know, with the CEOs of countries, etc., etc. Don't you think that there's really smart people like yourself, like someone with your knowledge levels, on a kind of governing level as well? Like, I'm sure if we bring Ajit Doval on the podcast, he would give us 20 podcasts just like you did. There has to be more people like that. Do you think that is the case? Do you think that there's really smart people governing this country and they already know these things that we're discussing? Or are there people in the government who are studying podcasts of Abhijit Chavda and getting inputs? This is something I've always wondered, that I've done about 350 podcasts with some really smart Indians. You're like right up there, especially when it comes to the information in your mind. And then you meet people at parties, you meet people in social situations. I've met politicians. And I think to myself that, are there really intelligent people at the top? And does intellect play a role in economic growth? Very raw question, but I just want to know what you think.
So when you are running a company, if you are successful, it's because you hire the right people, the best people. Similarly, in a government, if you do really well and if you take the nation forward in the right direction, it's only because you've got the right people in place, in the right places, right? I think there are lots of really intelligent people in the government. Let's take one example, Dr. S. Jaishankar, who's the current External Affairs Minister. I don't think he needs to learn anything from Abhijit Chavda. Nothing whatsoever. I need to learn a lot from him, right? He is a career diplomat. Currently, I think he's the most impactful diplomat on the globe. He's a very high energy person. He interacts with so many people on a daily basis, high-ranking diplomats, and he is carrying Indian diplomacy forward. He's putting across the message of India, and he's ensuring that the entire world understands what India's position is geopolitically, what India's national interest is, and there is no compromise that is being made in these diplomatic maneuvers vis-a-vis India's national interest, long-term national interest. So Dr. Jaishankar is, I think, one of the most brilliant diplomats in the world, and he is currently the foreign minister. Similarly, we have the right people in place in other ministers as well. You spoke about Mr. Gadkari. Mr. Gadkari is in charge of the infrastructure development, highways and all that. Just look at the pace at which highways are being built. 30, 40, 50 kilometers a day in India. So I think Mr. Modi knows what kind of people to pick and place in the appropriate places, and that's what's being done. Now, when it comes to intellect, India, like you said, is a civilization full of intellects. For every Ramanujan we discover, there are 100 Ramanujans we have lost. So we need to create mechanisms to catch the intellect. You may see one, but there's a whole lot that we are missing right now because of the problems in our system. The education system is terrible, and so on and so forth. There is a lack of merit in the education system. It's about reservation, not about how intelligent and how good you are and how well you perform and all that. So these issues are there. But if you can get the system right, this country will take off because we have the intellect.
Maybe we've got the system right with cheap internet. Maybe. It's too early to say in terms of that experiment. I think Jio kicked off in 2016. Which is what, like 6 years?
6 years, yeah.
Too short a time period. But I will tell you that you go meet rural Indians, they're not the rural Indians of 10 years ago.
Yes.
They know a lot more. Maybe that experiment has kicked off. But coming back to Mr. Jaishankar, I'd love for you to relay actually what AC has picked up from. What have you picked up from him? Like, I can't imagine what you've picked up from another human being. Because we pick up a lot of shit from you. So, what have you picked up from him?
So I call this the Jaishankar doctrine, which is an extension of the Modi doctrine. So the Modi doctrine is about taking India forward with India's national interest being paramount. So the Jaishankar doctrine is how India is going to interact and interface with the world, especially the major powers, especially with the West. Right? So there are certain tenets that this doctrine has, certain pillars. The first pillar is the assertion that the West stole $45 trillion plus from India. And what is the West? It is the British Empire and its extension, which is the US Empire as well. The US is an extension of the British Empire. That is a clear, explicit thing that is that Dr. Jaishankar has spoken about multiple times, right? So the West has been the oppressor of India for a very long time. And if India is in the position that it is today, third world nation, very low per capita GDP, etc., it's because of the West. Secondly, there is the explicit assertion that Russia is not part of the West, and therefore Russia was never involved in the oppression of India, right? Then there is the idea that India is going to pursue an independent foreign policy. India will cooperate fully with the West when it comes to economic development activities, but there will be issue-based cooperation on strategic and national security matters. Issue-based. Each issue will be looked upon individually. The merits and demerits will be weighed up, and then India will make its own choice independently. India does not need foreign guidance or interference in these matters, and so on and so forth. So there is a very clear foreign policy that Dr. Jaishankar is pursuing, and that is clearly an extension of the overall Modi doctrine, because that's the vision that Mr. Modi clearly has. We can now see it. That's the direction in which he has been taking the nation forward. And finally, we have a foreign minister who can properly enunciate that and explain that and put it across to all the counterparts that he has across the world. He's a very active foreign minister, and we are seeing a very clear geopolitical strategy through Dr. Jaishankar.
So, keeping in mind Dr. Jaishankar's reality, one slightly more layered question. What do you think his motivation is? In terms of when we're sitting here in this podcasting room, we're talking about making India a richer country, a geopolitical force. Same intentions on his end? Like, he's very aware of these things about the 2032, 2033 mark. If yes, I would also like to ask you, do you think there's a deeper layer? Does he have plans for the 2040s as well? Could he be one of India's next prime ministers?
See, Dr. Jaishankar is a retired diplomat. So I'm sure he's above 60. He must be in his mid-60s most likely. So he clearly understands geopolitics. As a career diplomat, he had to put forward the various policies of the various governments. Right? He had to essentially be an agent of these governments in the diplomatic sphere. For once, he has been empowered to not indulge in politics and just deal with the national interest. So that is a very good thing. Now, is he possibly a next prime minister? It's too early to tell. Being a good diplomat doesn't necessarily mean that you can be a good prime minister or a good administrator. When it comes to administering and governing a nation, there's a whole lot more than diplomacy. You have to actually deal with politics. Diplomats don't deal with national politics and state level politics and all that. Prime ministers have to do that. They have to juggle a whole lot of political egos and God knows what. So I am not sure if a diplomat is equipped or trained to do that sort of thing. So I am not saying that Dr. Jaishankar could not do that, but I personally have not thought about seeing him as a potential future prime minister.
Okay. And maybe one last question, AC. Would you want to get into politics at any point?
No, absolutely not. Politics is a cutthroat game. I'm good as an observer, as an analyst or whatever. I don't know what you want to call me, but I certainly do not want to get into politics.
You'd make a very strong part of an advisory board for the government for sure. I'm sure there's people who have their eyes on you and you will get some sort of job offers going forward. Would you consider taking it up if it was in geopolitical interest?
If it serves the nation, I would.
Man, if I was the PM, I would want you like by my side, AC. But right now I'm just a podcaster and you're always on our side. Another epic episode of TRS. Thank you, sir. I think it's time to move into our sequel episode to this one, which is the geopolitical update. Any last message for the listeners?
Keep your eyes on global politics, on global geopolitics. Always see the big picture and look at the long term. Don't look at things from on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis. Look at things from a year-to-year perspective. And try to learn history if you want to really learn geopolitics and understand geopolitics.
We will see you again, Abhijit Chavda, sir. Thank you for another epic show.
Thank you very much.
That's it. I'm not going to talk about what I feel about this episode. What I will say is that the 3 episodes we recorded after this were as heavy, were as informative, were as impactful. So make sure you watch out for them. Also, make sure you follow us on Spotify. Every episode's available on Spotify 48 hours before it's available anywhere else in the world. AC will return on the Ranveer show very soon. Keep following because great content has only just begun. Especially if you're an international listener, go check out the bank that we've created on this channel. On Spotify if you're an audio listener. Because this is an informative podcast. And we're only just starting out. Booyakasha.
भाई आज की इस वीडियो में जो है ना मैं स्टार्ट जो है वो लेना चाहूँगा सोशल मीडिया से। नो डाउट जहाँ पे सोशल मीडिया जो है हमारी ज़िंदगी में बहुत ज़्यादा आसानियाँ लेकर आया, बहुत सारी यानी कि एक ग्लोबल विलेज जहाँ पर हमारा बन गया हुआ है। लेकिन वहाँ पर अगर देखा जाए तो आज के टाइम में हमें प्राइवेसी को लेकर, सिक्योरिटी को लेकर जो है वो बहुत ज़्यादा इश्यूज देखने को मिल रहे हैं।
वैसे मैं स्टार्ट करना चाह रही थी अमेरिका से, लेकिन चलें कोई बात नहीं, अभी हम लोग 5th जनरेशन वॉर से ही स्टार्ट करते हैं।
लेकिन ऑन दी
आप डायरेक्टली और इनडायरेक्टली इस चीज को उसके साथ कनेक्ट कर सकते हो, क्योंकि अगर देखा जाए तो ये फॉर्मूला जो है तो वेस्ट का ही है कि किस तरीके से जो डिफरेंट नेशंस हैं उनकी प्राइवेसी को खत्म किया जाए और वो क्या सोचती हैं या उनको किस साइड पर सोचने को मजबूर किया जाए, ये उनमें चीज टेक्नोलॉजी के थ्रू लेकर आई जाए। सो मुझे लगता है कि जहां पर टेक्नोलॉजी के बहुत ज्यादा फायदे भी हैं वहां पर कुछ नुकसान भी हैं, लेकिन हम लोगों को अवेयर होना पड़ेगा कि हम लोगों ने इसको किस तरीके से इस्तेमाल करना है। मुझे लगता है कि इसके बहुत सारे पॉजिटिव फायदे हैं अगर हम लोग थोड़ी सी समझदारी के साथ इस्तेमाल करें। प्रॉब्लम इज कि हम लोग नेगेटिविटी को बहुत ज्यादा बढ़ावा दे देते हैं, उसको प्रमोट करना शुरू हो जाते हैं, बजाय ये सोचे समझने के कि ये किस कॉन्टेक्स्ट में बात हो रही है या क्या एक्चुअल में ये ऐसा हुआ है या नहीं हुआ, या ये सिर्फ वन साइडेड स्टोरी है। हमें और भी बहुत सारे एस्पेक्ट्स देखने चाहिए, बट अनफॉर्चुनेटली हम वो सब चीजें जो है वो इग्नोर कर देते हैं और जो हमें दिखाया जाता है बस हम उसी पर अपनी ओपिनियन बनाकर उसको फॉरवर्ड करते रहते हैं। तो सो मुझे लगता है कि ये एक बहुत बड़ी बात है जिसकी वजह से आपकी सोसाइटी में केओस होता है और इसका डायरेक्टली और इनडायरेक्टली फायदा जो है वो उन कंट्रीज को होता है जो आपकी कंट्री को प्रॉस्पेरस नहीं देखना चाहते।
यार अभी कुछ अर्से पहले की बात करें तो मुझे जहां तक याद है एक टेक जायंट है जिसकी जो है वो एक एम्प्लॉय थी, उन्होंने ये चीज जो है कही थी कि सोशल मीडिया पर इस तरह होता है कि आप जो नेगेटिव चीजें होती हैं ना वो लॉगरिथम जो होता है ना वो बहुत तेजी से वायरल कर दिया जाता है उस वीडियो को या जो भी एक लिंक हो, तो वो जो है ना बहुत ज्यादा लोगों तक सर्कुलेट करता है आपके इमोशंस के साथ, आपके एक जो है ना फेयर के साथ, वो चीज खिलवाड़ बहुत अच्छे तरीके से करता है जो कि सच है।
वैसे अगर कुछ अर्से पहले से हम लोग बात स्पेशली पैंडेमिक की बात करते हैं, आई थिंक उस टाइम पर काफी सारी ऐसी चीजें एक्सपोज हुई थी कि चाइना जो है वो आपकी डेटा प्राइवेसी जो है वो
डिफरेंट
एप्स के थ्रू चोरी करता है। सो आई थिंक बहुत सारे लोग हमें से उस टाइम पर ये चीज उनके नॉलेज में आई कि ऐसा भी पॉसिबल होता है, क्योंकि मैं खुद ये चीज नोटिस करती हूँ कि अगर मैंने फेसबुक पर या मैंने यूट्यूब पर कोई चीज देखी है तो मुझे इंस्टा पर भी वो चीज जो है वो देखने को मिलेगी और वही एड्स आते मिलेंगे और समटाइम्स सीरियसली मैं हैरान होती हूँ कि ये तो मैंने यहाँ पर खोला नहीं तो ये कैसे आ गई, बट फिर मुझे क्योंकि वीडियोस देखी हैं इस वजह से हम लोग उस चीज से थोड़े फेमिलियर हैं। लेकिन वो लोग जिनको टेक्नोलॉजी से या हम कहें कि वो इतना नॉलेज नहीं लेते चीजों के बारे में, उनको पागल बनाना बहुत ज्यादा आसान
यार आप ये देखें, आप व्हाट्सएप अगर किसी अपने दोस्त के साथ बात करें ना, यार मैंने शूज लेने हैं, ठीक है ना, तो आपको जो है उससे रिलेटेड आपके इंस्टाग्राम पे, फेसबुक पे एड्स आना शुरू हो जाएंगे।
इनफैक्ट मैंने ये चीज नोट की है कि जो आपकी ऑनलाइन शॉपिंग की एप्स होती हैं उसमें भी आपको वही वाली चीजें जो हैं वो मतलब पॉपअप होते हैं, वो नोटिफिकेशंस
बिल्कुल
कि ये वाली चीजें क्योंकि हम किसी और साइट पर देख रहे थे तो वो वहां पर भी अवेलेबल है। तो यहाँ से पता चलता है कि आपके डेटा की प्राइवेसी जो है वो अब कितनी रह गई हुई है। अच्छा, अभी हम बात करते हैं अब अमेरिका की। सो अमेरिका, मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि जैसे कि इनिशियली अमेरिका ने चाइना को सपोर्ट किया, एक बहुत बड़ी हम कहेंगे कि
जायंट बना दिया
बनाने में, हाँ, कि जिस तरीके से पूरी दुनिया उस पर डिपेंड करना शुरू की। और फिर उसके बाद चाइना जो है उसने ही अमेरिका को हम कहें कि एक आंखें दिखाना शुरू कर दी। काउंटर तो वो भी कर रहा है लेकिन आंखें दिखाना शुरू कर दी। सो अगर हम लोग इंडिया के मामले में देखें तो क्लियरली ये विजिबल है कि अमेरिका कभी भी नहीं चाहता कि इंडिया जो है वो उभर कर सामने आए या वो उस तरीके से उसकी ग्रोथ हो। लेकिन एट द सेम टाइम उसको अभी ये भी पता है कि अमेरिका को कि जो इंडिया है वो काफी ज्यादा लोग जो हैं मतलब बाकी जो दुनिया है उस पर डिपेंड करना शुरू हो गई है। और अभी का जो हम लोग टाइम भी देखें तो इंडिया जिस तरीके से ग्रो कर रहा है तो मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि ये वाकई में इजी नहीं है इंडिया के लिए इस जर्नी को हम कहेंगे कि लेकर चलना। बहुत सारे चैलेंजेस आएंगे, बहुत डिफिकल्ट टास्क फेस करने पड़ेंगे। बट जिस तरीके से हम लोग डिप्लोमेट्स देख रहे हैं इंडिया के या फिर हम लोग पॉलिटिशियंस को देख रहे हैं जिस तरीके से वो काम कर रहे हैं, सो मुझे लगता है कि इवेंचुअली एक पॉइंट ऐसा जरूर आएगा जहां पर इंडिया जो है वो डोमिनेट होना शुरू हो जाएगा। क्योंकि अभी अगर हम देखें तो उसकी एक हम कहेंगे कि शुरुआत हो चुकी हुई है। इंडिया के जो स्टेटमेंट्स हैं उनका बहुत ज्यादा आपको एक असर नजर आता है। और दूसरा ये कि इंडिया आपको अब ज्यादा एक्टिव नजर आता है हर पॉइंट को रेज करने में और दूसरों तक, स्पेशली वेस्ट तक, उनके कानों में डालने के लिए कि भाई अगर आपके ये इश्यूज हैं तो हमारे भी ये इश्यूज हैं। सो मुझे लगता है कि अगर पीएम मोदी जी की भी बात करें तो उन्होंने सबसे पहले जो मुझे लगता है कि सबसे जो एक इम्पॉर्टेंट काम किया वो लोगों को यूनाइटेड करने के लिए और लोगों को अपनी रूट से, संस्कृति से प्यार करना सिखाया, जिसकी वजह से मुझे लगता है कि बाकी सारी चीजें जो हैं वो खुद ब खुद फिर उसी डायरेक्शन में जाना शुरू हुई। क्योंकि जब आप अपने लोगों को ये कॉन्फिडेंस देते हैं, आपकी लीडरशिप ये कॉन्फिडेंस देती है तो डेफिनेटली आपको उसके रिजल्ट्स नजर आते हैं।
अभी थोड़े दिन पहले जो है ना मैं ईमानदारी से बात कर रहा था क्योंकि मैंने एक वीडियो देखी थी तो उसमें जब वर्ल्ड वॉर 2 एंड हुई उसके बाद जो ट्रांसफर ऑफ पावर हुआ, ठीक है ना, अमेरिका को, तो उससे रिलेटेड मैं इनसे बात कर रहा था कि उससे पहले एक अगर देखा जाए तो एक पावर का जो एक हब समझा जाता था वो यूके को बेसिकली समझा जाता था क्योंकि दुनिया की बहुत सारी टेरिटरी जो है वो ऑक्यूपाई करता था उस टाइम। लेकिन जब अमेरिका के पास जो है पावर गई तो अब तब से लेकर अब तक देखा जाए तो काफी एक लंबा अरसा गुजर चुका हुआ है। तो बेसिकली कहने का मतलब ये है कि ट्रांसफर ऑफ पावर जो है ना कोई भी कंट्री जो है इतनी आसानी से अपने हाथों से नहीं जाने देता। बहुत दूसरे वही ना, बेसिकली कहने का ये मतलब कि अमेरिका कभी नहीं ये चाहेगा कि ट्रांसफर ऑफ पावर जो है ना वो किसी और को करे। तो ये देखा जाए तो ये चीजें जो है ना अब उस टाइम अमेरिका ने किस तरह चीजों को प्ले किया, उसने जो है क्या ऐसी जो है वो स्ट्रेटजीज अपनाई कि जो है खुद वो साइड पर रहकर एक जो है ना वो तमाशाई बनकर देखता रहा और सप्लाई करता रहा चीजें पूरी दुनिया को, उनके गोल्ड रिजर्व, उनका सब कुछ जो है वो अपने पास वो ले गया।
वैसे मुझे ये लगता है ना मौजम के देखो अभी जिस तरीके से अमेरिका डायरेक्टली और इनडायरेक्टली इंटरफेयर करता है या फिर वो किसी और कंट्री के थ्रू करता है, वो इसीलिए करता है ताकि आपकी खुद की कंट्री में जो है वो प्रॉब्लम एक chaos रहे। जैसे बीच में मतलब उन्होंने बात की कि मतलब अगर देखें तो चाइना, मुझे नहीं लगता अभी अगर मैं देखूं जहां तक मेरी ऑब्जर्वेशन है कि अभी वो डायरेक्टली इंडिया के साथ कोई गलवान वैली में हाँ मतलब वो कोई इस तरह का पंगा लेगा क्योंकि उसने बहुत मैं कहूंगी कि अनएक्सपेक्टेड चीजें जो हैं वो फेस की हैं इंडिया की तरफ से। पर जहां तक पाकिस्तान की बात है मुझे नहीं लगता कि वो स्थिति में है कि वो किसी के साथ भी हम कहें कि अभी ऐसे मसले मसालों में आ सके क्योंकि अभी जो इकोनॉमी की कंडीशन है पाकिस्तान में मुझे लगता है कि वो बहुत ही खराब चल रही है। सो मुझे लगता है कि अगर ओवरऑल देखा जाए तो इंडिया के लिए नो डाउट ये चैलेंजिंग एक टाइम है और साथ में उसके क्योंकि जो इर्द गिर्द के आपके हम कहेंगे कि जो लोग प्रॉब्लम क्रिएट करते हैं, चाहे वो आपकी खुद की कंट्री के अंदर से हो, चाहे वो बाहर से हो, तो मुझे लगता है कि जो घर के अंदर के लोग होते हैं उनको हैंडल करना थोड़ा ज़्यादा मुश्किल होता है, क्योंकि उसमें बहुत सारी चीज़ें आ जाती हैं। और स्पेशली मैं यहाँ पर बात करूंगी कि राइट विंग और लेफ्ट विंग, हम लोग को वीडियो देखने से पहले बिल्कुल भी नहीं पता होता था कि ये राइट विंग और लेफ्ट विंग क्या होता है, कि ये कौन सी ओपिनियंस होती हैं लोगों की, लेकिन ये वीडियो देख देख कर हम लोगों को आइडिया हो गया। सो अब ये है कि मेरी चीज़ें जो है समझ आती है जब कोई इस तरह की बात करता है।
यार यहाँ पे सबसे पहले तो मैं बात करना चाहूंगा पीएम मोदी जी की, कि जैसे वीडियो में एक चीज कही गई और बाकी उनकी तारीफ है कि उन्होंने जो है राइट प्लेस पर राइट पर्सन को जो है उन्होंने जो पॉइंट किया हुआ है, ठीक है ना, ये वाकई उनकी तारीफ है। क्योंकि अगर आप एक जगह है जहाँ पे एक आपका कोई ऐसा मिनिस्टर के होने की उसे जरूरत है, लेकिन आपने किसी और को बैठाया हुआ है, वो उस तरह परफॉर्मेंस नहीं दे पाएगा जिस तरह दूसरा एक बंदा जो उसके कैपेबल है, जिसका इंटरेस्ट उसमें है, पैशन उसका वो है, वो दे पाएगा। तो ये वाकई जो है उनकी तारीफ है। फिर उसके बाद जो है मैं बात करना चाहूँगा कि एक जो वेस्टर्न नैरेटिव बना दिया जाता है हर कंट्री के बारे में कि भाई आप वहाँ पर जाएंगे तो आपको वहाँ पे ये सीन फेस करना पड़ सकता है, वहाँ पर तो भाई घर इस तरह के हैं, वो तो स्टोन एज में रह रहे हैं। तो ये भी एक जो है हकीकत है। बहुत सारे कंट्रीज जो हैं, जो उनके जो लोग हैं जो नहीं आए हुए, जिन्होंने कभी इंडिया विजिट ही नहीं किया, बहुत सारे पाकिस्तानियों का भी जो है ये माइंडसेट हो सकता है कि इंडिया में जो है डेवलपमेंट उस तरह से नहीं है। क्योंकि अगर देखा जाए तो ज्यादातर वही देखा जाता है जो आपको एक मेन स्ट्रीम मीडिया में दिखाया जाता है।
बिल्कुल, इसीलिए तो कहा जाता है कि जो मेन स्ट्रीम मीडिया है वो काफी ज्यादा मैनिपुलेट करता है। और सोशल मीडिया की मुझे यही तो एक मैं कहूँगी कि एक अफादियत नजर आती है कि एटलीस्ट यहाँ पर आप अपने ओपिनियन दे सकते हो, आपको इंटरनेशनली चीजें जो है वो पता चलती हैं। जहां तक पॉलिटिशियंस की बात है कि वो बिल्कुल अप्रोप्रिएट पोजीशन में होते हैं या नहीं होते, तो मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि ये थोड़ी मिक्स सिचुएशन होती है। मतलब ये मेरी पर्सनल ओपिनियन है, क्योंकि मैं बहुत सारे अगर यहाँ पर बात करूँ तो मैंने देखा है कि यहाँ पर इस तरह का कल्चर है जहाँ पर आप लोगों को शायद इस बेस पर नहीं अपॉइंट करते कि उसकी काबिलियत कितनी है, इस बेस पर पॉइंट किया जाता है कि आपके उसके साथ टर्म्स कितने या उससे आपको कितने बेनिफिट्स हो सकते हैं। तो मुझे लगता है कि जब तक आप कंट्री के लिए सर्व नहीं करते तब तक चीजें जो हैं वो सही नहीं होती। मैं ये नहीं कहूंगी कि सब लोग ऐसे हैं, डेफिनेटली कुछ लोग ऐसे भी होते होंगे जो कि बिल्कुल पेट्रियाटिक होते होंगे, जो नेशन को सर्व करना चाहते होंगे, लेकिन उनकी शायद सुनी नहीं जाती उतनी। जहां मतलब मैं अगर पाकिस्तान की बात करूं तो मुझे लगता है कि लोगों में ये चीज एक अवेयरनेस आनी चाहिए कि एटलीस्ट हमें अपने लिए वो लीडर, ऐसे लोग चाहिए जो हमें लीड कर सके, जिनमें काबिलियत हो। और दूसरा ये कि जितने भी लोग जो कि पाकिस्तान में नहीं रहते, चाहे वो पाकिस्तानी हैं, और जैसे कि इंडिया की बीच में इंडियंस की बात हुई, तो मैं ये एक चीज देखती हूँ कि बड़ा ना एक डिफरेंट तरीके से मैं बताती हूँ कि एक जो पाकिस्तानी है, जो कोई बाहर से पाकिस्तानी जो कि लाइक कोई यूके में रह रहा है, अमेरिका में रह रहा है, और वो पाकिस्तान छुट्टियों में आ रहे हैं, तो मैंने ये चीज देखी, एक तो ऑलरेडी पाकिस्तानी लोगों के दिमाग में ना थोड़ा सा होगा एक कॉम्प्लेक्स होंगे वो, कि वो एक ऐसे कंट्री से उठ के आया जो कि बहुत ही डेवलप्ड कंट्रीज है, उनको चीजों के बारे में पता है एग्जैक्टली। तो वो एक तुलना भी अगर करेंगे ना तो वो थोड़ा सा अपने आप को डाउन फील करेंगे, ठीक है। ये वो चीज है जो मुझे लगता है कि इस वजह से, क्योंकि यहाँ पर लोगों को पढ़ाया नहीं गया, उनकी एजुकेशन पर उतना ज्यादा फोकस नहीं किया गया। और यही चीज जो है मुझे अच्छी लगती है पीएम मोदी जी में, कि उन्होंने अपने लोगों को कॉन्फिडेंस दिया है। और अगर हमारे लीडर्स भी यहाँ पर यही कॉन्फिडेंस लोगों को देते, अपनी रूट्स के साथ प्यार करना सिखाते, अपने कल्चर के साथ प्यार करना सिखाते, कॉन्फिडेंट करते, तो मुझे लगता है कि ये चीजें शायद आज के टाइम पर नहीं देखने को मिलती, या बहुत कम देखने को हम लोगों को मिलती। और दूसरा मैं बात करूंगी माइनॉरिटीज की। मुझे नहीं लगता, जब ऑनेस्टली बोलूं तो जब से हम लोगों ने वीडियोस देखना शुरू की हैं, हम लोगों ने जितनी भी वीडियोस देखी हैं, हालांकि हम लोगों को समटाइम्स ईमेल्स भी ऐसी रिसीव होती है जिसमें हम लोगों को बोला जाता है कि आप जो है करंट गवर्नमेंट के प्रोजेक्ट्स बस देखते रहते हैं और उन्हीं पर बात करते रहते हैं। तो मैं ये बात सोच रही हूँ कि हम लोगों को जब एक चीज नजर आ रही है तो डेफिनेटली हम उसके बारे में बात करेंगे। मतलब बीइंग अ आउटसाइडर, आई थिंक हमारे लिए तो सोर्स ऑफ इन्फॉर्मेशन ये है, या फिर आप जो हमारे साथ इंटरेक्ट करते हैं उससे हमें पता चलता है। यहाँ पर हमें चीजें इस तरह की, यहाँ पर तो न्यूज भी कोई ऐसी हमें नजर नहीं आती कि ऐसा कुछ हो रहा है, या फिर ग्राउंड पर जाकर कभी कोई ऐसी हम लोगों ने चीज देखी हो कि ये प्रोजेक्ट जो इतना सामने उभर कर आ रहा है। सो मुझे लगता है कि जो लोग अपने ही कंट्री में खराबियां पैदा करने की कोशिश कर रहे होते हैं ना, या उनको ये चीज अच्छी नहीं लग रही होती कि कि कोई हमारी सोच के ऑपोजिट क्यों जा रहा है, जैसे हम चाह रहे हैं वैसा क्यों नहीं हो रहा, तो उन लोगों को मुझे लगता है थोड़ा समझने की ज़रूरत है। क्योंकि देखो मुझे लगता है कि माइनॉरिटीज़ का कभी कोई इशू होना नहीं चाहिए, और उसकी रीज़न ये है कि हर जगह पर आपको प्रॉब्लम्स नज़र आती हैं। इट डिपेंड्स कि हम उसको पोर्ट्रे किस तरीके से करते हैं। समटाइम्स हम लोग फेवर लेने के लिए तो भाई वो कर देंगे कि माइनॉरिटीज़ को इस तरह से हो गया, अब सोशल मीडिया का हमारे पास है प्लेटफॉर्म तो हम लोग इसको भी फैला देंगे। बट ऑनेस्टली बोलूँ, मुझे नहीं लगता कि इंडिया में माइनॉरिटीज़ जो हैं वो सिक्योर नहीं है, क्योंकि हम लोग जो हिस्ट्री की भी जो चीज़ें देखते हैं, जैसे कि हम लोगों ने पारसी लोगों के बारे में वीडियो देखी थी, फिर उसके अलावा मुस्लिम्स की अगर हम लोग बात करें, क्रिश्चियंस की बात करें, इतने सारे कल्चर रिलीजन हैं जो कि एक जगह पर इतनी देर से रह रहे हैं। तंगी हर जगह पर होती है, हर किसी को होती है, बट इसका मतलब ये नहीं होता कि आप वो फेवर लेना शुरू कर दो। मुझे लगता है कि आपको खुद एग्जैक्टली वो मिक्स होना चाहिए, फ्लेक्सिबल होना चाहिए। हमें भी खुद देखना चाहिए कि हम कितने फ्लेक्सिबल हैं। इवन मैं ये देखती हूँ जरूर कि यहाँ पर काफी सारे ऐसे पेजेस हैं जो कि अब इंडिया की जो न्यूज़ है वो देते हैं। अब लोगों को तो नहीं पता कि इसके पीछे क्या स्टोरी है, लेकिन वो आधी अधूरी कहानी ज़रूर जो है वो बयान कर रहे होते हैं, और लोग उसी बेस पर अपनी ओपिनियन बनाना शुरू कर देते हैं। बट मुझे ये लगता है ना कि सीरियसली पाकिस्तानी जितने भी आम लोग हैं उनके बारे में मुझे ये लगता है कि उनको कोई ओपिनियन इंडिया के बारे में बनाने से पहले एक चीज़ ज़रूर सोचनी चाहिए कि उनको पहले अपनी यहाँ की माइनॉरिटीज़ के जो फिगर्स हैं ना वो ज़रूर चेक करने चाहिए कि 1947 से लेकर अभी तक वो कितने बड़े हैं या वो कितने कम है, और फिर उस बेस पर आपको बात करनी चाहिए। और ये सेम चीजें मुझे लगता है कि बाकी सारी कंट्रीज पर भी
इम्प्लीमेंट
होती हैं। चाहे अमेरिका है कि वहां पर रेसिज्म कितना ज्यादा है, यूके में देखें वो लोग बहुत ज्यादा रेसिस्ट हैं। सो मुझे लगता है ये एक ऐसा टॉपिक है जो कि कभी खत्म नहीं होने वाला, और लोगों को इस पे जितना समझदार होने की जरूरत है, मुझे लगता है कि वो उतना ही मुझे लगता है कि वो चीजें जो है वो बेहतर होना शुरू हो जाएगी। बाकी अगर देखा जाए तो मुझे लगता है कि अंडर पीएम मोदी जी इंडिया जो है उसमें वो काफ़ी ज़्यादा प्रोग्रेस की तरफ जा रहा है, और आने वाले टाइम में मुझे तो यही लगता है कि इंडिया जो है वो काफ़ी ज़्यादा ग्रो करेगा, क्योंकि जिस तरीके से हम इंडिया की ग्रोथ देख रहे हैं, डिफरेंट प्रोजेक्ट देख रहे हैं, इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर देख रहे हैं, और बाकी जैसे भी सेमीकंडक्टर का भी हम लोगों ने देखा। सो मुझे लगता है कि यस, आने वाला टाइम जो है वो इंडिया के लिए काफ़ी अच्छा टाइम होगा। आप ज़रूर बताइएगा कि आपकी क्या ओपिनियन इसके बारे में कमेंट सेक्शन में, और इसी के साथ मैं चाहूँ हमारे वीडियो
लाइक, सब्सक्राइब, शेयर, गुड बाय।